like to welcome everybody to our second International Symposium. First one was held 6 years ago, on the campus of Emory University. And this is here in our hometown of Hurst, Texas, NFSI's home base, where all slip, trip, and fall prevention kind of begins. And so, again, thanks for attending. We have a very diverse group of attendees and a very distinguished group of speakers. There's going to be quite a few people online watching you from all over the world. And so let's go ahead and introduce our keynote this morning. And, you know, it's interesting because there's very few people in the media, and I've worked with many of them, that really have had quite the significant impact on people's lives. And not just broadcasting, not just talking about news events, but actually standing up and caring for people. And that's ultimately what all of us do in our jobs, right? Our job is to look out for other people. I mean, we're all safety professionals, risk managers, attorneys, but it's all about taking care of people. It's about preventing injuries. That's the focus. That's what NFSI is all about. And that's what our speaker is going to be talking about this morning. Combining a moving life story, an exceptional career, incomparable insights, and a powerful presence, John Quinones has emerged as one of the most inspiring keynotes in the speaking world today. His moving presentations focus on his odds-defying journey, celebrate the life-changing power of education, champion the Latino American dream, and provide thought-provoking insights into human nature and ethical behavior. A lifetime of never taking no for an answer took John Quinones from migrant farm worker and poverty to more than 30 years at ABC News, the anchor desk at 2020 in prime time. John won 7 Emmy Awards for his reporting over the years. And along the way, he broke through a lot of barriers, won the highest accolades, and became a role model for many people. As host and creator of What Would You Do?, the highly rated Hidden Camera Ethical Dilemma News magazine is now in its 14th season. I didn't know you were that old. Quinones has literally become the face of doing the right thing for millions of Americans. And so with that, I'd like to go ahead and ask John to come up.
Thanh you. How you doing?
Let's give a big round.
Yeah. All right, man. Good to see you again. How long has it been?
A while.
Good morning, everyone. Boy, you guys start early. What the heck? Yes. Thank you, Russ. It's a pleasure to be with all of you here at this incredibly important scenario. You know, I mean, symposium. I do the scenarios. You do the symposiums. I'm a big fan of the work of Russ, Kendzior, and the National Floor Safety Institute. All the work you've been doing for so many years to aid in the prevention of slips, trips, and falls through education, research, standard development. You know, obviously, that work is obviously very important. Yeah, I'm the guy who brought you the show, What Would You Do? So you all been warned, you know. If you're sitting there, we can put those hidden cameras anywhere. If you're sitting there and the person next to you passes out and you step over them to get another cup of coffee, you're going to have me to talk to you. I'm a reporter. I've been a reporter at ABC for 40 years. Ever since I was 10 years old, I started. A storyteller. And the thing I love about journalism and my profession is that as a network TV reporter, I get to shine a light on issues that a lot of people don't want to talk about and don't want to hear about. I created What Would You Do?, this hidden camera show, after being a reporter on ABC's Good Morning America, World News Tonight with Peter Jennings and Barbara Walters and Diane Sawyer and Primetime Live. I created this one show 15 years ago because we wanted to hold up a mirror to American society. We wanted to know, how do you unlock the power and the light that exists in each and every one of us so that we're all better equipped to say, you know what, that's wrong, or how can I help? And what better tool to do that with than with hidden cameras on national television? What would you do poses that very question. When you witness any kind of injustice, gay bashing, someone being ridiculed because of the color of their skin, the accent in their voice, condemned because of the religion they practice, when you come face to face with bullying, spousal abuse, and the little voice in the back of your head says, do something, do you step in or do you step away? What would you do? I mean, after all, isn't that the true test of a person's character? It's not what we do when everyone's watching. That's easy. It's what we do even when no one is watching. It's all about doing the right thing. And you know, we face these moral and ethical dilemmas every day in our daily lives, even you guys who deal in the business of this. Regardless of what we do for a living, we face these dilemmas every single day. The question is, what do you do with that opportunity to right a wrong? Do you sound the alarm? Do you lend a helping hand? Or do you just look the other way and keep walking your own way and ignore the injustice? Silence is complicity. We have to raise our voices. I think these days in America more than ever, because the country's still pretty divided. A lot of people are angry after the COVID pandemic, you know, whether to wear a mask or whether to get vaccinated. And they took it out just about on anyone they encountered, but especially people in the service industry. The latest figures from the FBI show that hate crimes in this country are at the highest level they've been in a decade. All you got to do is watch television or go on, you know, surf the web, right? And you see all those videos that go viral of, you know, people claiming that they were wronged in one way or the other. The condemnation of Muslims and transgenders, all that stuff, the immigration issue, which is a very issue that's very close to my heart because I was born in San Antonio, Texas, and even though my family's been here a long time, we've been watching the immigration story and covering it for ABC. You know, and we found that after all these years, you know, we've done about 1,000 what would you do scenarios. And when we started, we thought we would run out of ideas. I mean, how many can you do, right? And here we are. We're going to go into our 17th season. ABC just asked me to put a new season of What Would You Do? After being off for COVID, we haven't done the show in 4 years. But we're going to come back with a brand new season in February. We've done 1,000 scenarios in 15 years. And again, we rip a lot of these ideas from the headlines. We watch what's going on in the world, and then we replicate the scenario. And it happens to all of us. I get messages on social media all the time, people saying, John, I had a what would you do moment today. I thought you were going to come out. I tell them I'm only one man. I can only be in one town at the same time, right? But it's happened even to me. I mean, here I am. I think I'm a famous television reporter. I've been at ABC all these years. I do my own show. The other day I was at an airport and I was checking in and I was at the gate. And I was dressed down in a baseball cap, you know, t-shirt and jeans. And I was lucky enough to be flying in first class, so I'm standing in the first class line getting onto a plane to New York. And then I noticed that by mistake, all the other first class passengers have lined up in the economy line, which happens, right? I didn't care. I was in the right place. I was the first one. As I'm standing there, the lady in the front of the other line, who was in the wrong line, she was in first class, but you know, they lined up at the wrong place. She looked over to me and she said, "Sir, are you even in first class?" And I just nodded. I pointed to the sign above my head. I didn't want to cause a scene. And she said, "Well, the first class passengers are over here, so get to the back of this line." So I walked to the back of the line. And on my way to the back of that line, I didn't care. I'm still in first class. So what? I get in 12 people later. It doesn't matter. As I'm walking to the back of the line, though, she yells out, "The announcement was made in English. We speak English in America." And then other people in line who recognized me finally from the TV show said, "John, is this a what would you do moment? Are you filming your show here?" And I said, "No, unfortunately, this is real life." And as I'm standing in the back of that first class line, my only concern was that I was going to have to sit next to this mean woman on the plane. Can you imagine 4 hours to New York? But as I got on the plane, she was by herself. No surprise there. And as I passed her seat, I couldn't resist. I leaned over and I whispered to her, because I didn't want to embarrass her, but I whispered to her, I said, "Ma'am, I do this show called What Would You Do? And you would be perfect for the show. You could play the part of the racist." She gave me another dirty look, And we carried on with the flight. But that's why we do the show, because I think the country needs it now more than ever. I got the greatest compliment on social media the other day when someone wrote that the world would be a better place if we all thought John Quinones was in the next room monitoring our behavior, because of course we would be on our best behavior. Of course, doing this show, what would you do all these years, has made it impossible for me to go have lunch or dinner anywhere without people saying, what's going to happen? Where are the hidden cameras? Why is John Quinones here? The good news is that when I'm in a restaurant, people are on their best behavior, you know? People are pulling out chairs for each other, they're leaving bigger tips. So how do we do it? I mean, how do we become active bystanders who step up and do the right thing and not just passive observers who ignore wrongdoing or injustice? Well, I think it starts in the home, right? As all things do. Very often, children learn to discriminate and to bully, to think they're better than others as they're growing up. You know, there's that great song from South Pacific, the musical, where the lyrics say, in part, you've got to be carefully taught before it's too late, before you're 6 or 7 or 8, to hate all the people your relatives hate. You've got to be carefully taught. But of course, you can also be taught the opposite, right? To be more accepting, to be more loving, to be more compassionate. I think it's as simple as putting yourselves in the shoes of the victim. You know, in some ways, it's easier for those of us who have been there. People of color, people who have been marginalized in society, anyone who has been marginalized. After all these years, we have found that time and again, the people who step in and come to the rescue and sound the alarm are the people who themselves have been the targets of racism, bullying, gay bashing, spousal abuse. They sound the alarm because they know what it's like. They've been there. That's why I feel like, in many ways, I was born to do this kind of show because of where I come from and the world that I grew up in. A lot of people who only know me on television and see me up there with the great people of ABC, you know, Peter Jennings before, and Barbara Walters, and now David Muir and Robin Roberts on Good Morning America. I work for all those shows, and people who only know me from that world have no idea of the long, hard struggle that it took for John Quinones to get to ABC News. I was born in poverty on the west side of San Antonio, Texas. And even though my family's been here for 7 generations, we didn't speak English because in San Antonio, 60% of the population is Hispanic. And my father dropped out of the 3rd grade to pick cotton in South Texas. My mother dropped out of the 4th grade also to help support her family. So we didn't speak English. Even though we were born and raised in Texas, which, by the way, 7 generations ago was part of Mexico and part of Spain, and so was California and New Mexico and Arizona. So I get a kick out of people who, when they come up to me and say, John Quinones, you're Mexican-American. When did you cross over the border and come to the U.S.? It's like we were always here. I never crossed the border crossed me. But we didn't speak English, and I'll never forget being in 1st grade as I went to Carvajal Elementary, and this is before bilingual education. My family couldn't afford preschool or kindergarten, so my 2 sisters and I went straight to public school, and I'll never forget being in Mrs. Gregory's 1st grade class at 8 in the morning, there twiddling my thumbs because the teacher doesn't speak Spanish and I didn't speak English. And at 10 in the morning, the school bell rings. And it's recess time, so of course all the kids go out to play in the playground. Where does little Johnny Quinones go? I walked home. I lived a block away, so I remember going home and my mother Maria saying, Juanito, ¿qué pasó? What happened? And I said to her in Spanish, Se acabó. It's over, Mom. I like school. 2 hours and we're done. This is going to work out very nicely. She literally grabbed me by the ear and dragged me back to Mrs. Gregory's class, because she knew the value of an education, not having gotten one herself. This is why I think I'm perfect to draw upon my experiences to do this kind of show called What Would You Do? When I was 13 years old, my father was laid off from work, and we did what a lot of Mexican-American families in South Texas had to do back then. We became migrant farm workers. We had no choice. So my dad, my mom, and my 2 sisters and I, jumped in the back of these trucks these caravans headed north to pick cherries, Northport, Michigan, the cherry capital of the world, where we picked cherries for 75 cents a bucket. We traveled 1,700 miles with these strangers. And I remember we had a gallon can of green beans and 2 loaves of bread. And that's what we survived on, getting up to Michigan, you know, green bean sandwiches. And I'll never forget standing on the top of these ladders, teetering on the top of these ladders. I could have used your help back then. Looking over orchards and orchards of cherry trees, 13 years old. And they would pay us 75 cents to fill a bucket that was strapped around our neck. 75 cents. And it would take me 2 hours to fill that darn bucket with cherries. And then after doing that for about 6 weeks, we did what all migrant farm workers do. We followed the crops down to Ohio, to a little town called Swanton, Ohio, outside of Toledo, where we picked tomatoes for 35 cents a bushel. And man, I was a champion tomato picker. I did 100 bushels a day. Well, back then, that's $35, right? And my father would pick 130 bushels, and my mother would contribute, and my sisters would contribute. And we learned the value of the family, like many of your families, I'm sure. The value of a family coming together in times of adversity and pulling ourselves up by our bootstraps. But I'll never forget being on my knees on the cold, hard ground at 6 in the morning, looking at a row of tomato plants that for a young 13-year-old boy's eyes seemed to go for miles and miles. That's what we had to look forward to that day. And I was with my father, Bruno, who looks down at me and says, Juanito, do you want to do this kind of work for the rest of your life? Or do you want to get a college education someday? It was a no-brainer. You know, I knew I didn't want to do that kind of back-breaking work for the rest of my life, but no one believed in me. When I came back to San Antonio and I got back into school in the 9th grade, I would ask my teachers and my counselors, how do I prepare for the SATs? How do I prepare for the ACTs? How do I take advanced placement classes in math, biology, and English? Do you know what my own teachers would say? My own counselors would say, my teachers. They'd look at me and say, Johnny, it's great that you have this dream of someday being a television reporter, but we think you should try wood shop or metal shop or auto mechanics. Not that there's anything wrong with those great trades. A lot of people make a good hard living, right, doing that kind of work, but I wanted to go to college. And my own teachers and my own counselors did what people do on that TV show, What Would You Do? Every week. They judged me by the color of my skin and the accent in my voice and the fact that no one in my family had gone to college. What gave me, they asked, what gave me the audacity to think that I was college material? But thank God for my mother Maria. My mother Maria, she was the one who kept pushing and inspiring and motivating. She would say to me, John, don't worry so much about having to wear the same clothes to school every other day. At least we wash them, right? They're clean. She would say, mijo, my son, don't be embarrassed about having to take bean and tortilla tacos for lunch when all the other kids are taking their fancy bologna and white bread. She said, that doesn't matter. What matters is what's in here, in your cabeza, in your brain, and what's in here, in your heart, in your corazon. She was the one who kept me pushing and being motivated. You know, it was during the civil rights movement, and I remembered the words of Martin Luther King, who said, in times of adversity, you got to have faith, and faith is taking that first step. It doesn't matter if you can't see the entire staircase, just take that first step, because tomorrow there'll be another step, and the next day another baby step. And in my case, my first step was getting rid of my accent, because learning English as a second language, believe it or not, I had a heavy accent. I would say, these are my shoes, this is my shirt, because in English and Spanish, there's no SH sound like there is in English. So I was committed, following the advice of Martin Luther King, to take that first step. You don't have to see the entire staircase. I enrolled in drama class in my high school, and I tried out for the role of Romeo in Romeo and Juliet, because I was really painfully shy, and I knew that if I was going to get into television like my heroes, Tom Brokaw, Walter Cronkite, Peter Jennings, I would have to get rid of my accent. So, and I was also incredibly shy. I would never be able to stand in front of a group like this, so I had to push myself. So I tried out for the role of Romeo in a citywide production of Romeo and Juliet in San Antonio. And maybe it's because no one else tried out, but I got the role. And there I was playing Romeo. The good news was that I got to kiss Juliet, Mary Lou Gomez, my first girlfriend. I was 13. And I remember we had to practice kissing behind the curtain because we wanted to be very convincing, right? That was the good news. The bad news was that in this incredibly macho school in San Antonio, Texas, I had to wear leotards, and I'm just glad there was no YouTube back then, because those videos would live in infamy. But then along came another hero in my life, and she was my English teacher. We all have one of those, right, who said, "John, I love the way you write your essays. I love the way you tell stories. Have you thought about journalism?" I said, "Yes, I've been watching Geraldo Rivera all these years on 2020. She said, "Well, you should talk to the man who runs the newspaper, the school newspaper, Mr. Harris, the teacher who teaches journalism in the weekly newspaper, the Brackenridge Times at my high school." So she introduced me to him, and I was hired as a reporter. So I've been doing this reporting thing since I was 13 years old. And within a couple of months, I became the chief of editorials, right? I was writing these big editorials, like these big investigative stories, like why are the teachers parking in the students' parking spaces? Tonight we go undercover and find out. And I loved that. And then along came another hero in my life, which was a college program called Upward Bound, which helped kids from the inner city get to college. I get into school like that way, and I went into St. Mary's University, got accepted there, and I had 4 jobs, when I was in college. I worked in the geology department, I worked in the janitorial department, I worked in the cafeteria, and at night, I was a drugstore delivery man for Blanco Pharmacies in San Antonio. The owner of that pharmacy knew that I was interested in broadcasting because he would hear me in the men's room practicing on a little cassette recorder my voice, again, trying to get over my accent. And he said, "Johnny, you really want to go into broadcasting?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, I know the general manager of a radio station here in San Antonio, and they're looking for interns." I was 18 years old. I was a freshman in college. So he takes me to KKYX Radio, a country music station in San Antonio, for an internship interview, and I was hired for $2 an hour. Now, you got to be from Texas to understand this. The disc jockeys, the guys who play the country music at that station, had horses in the back of the studios that they would use in parades, or public appearances, and rodeos. My job as an intern at the age of 18 for $2 an hour was to clean up the horse poop in the back of the station and feed the horses now and then. But at night, I got to sneak into the back control room where we had these big, beautiful reel-to-reel recorders and a gorgeous microphone, and practice my delivery. The only problem was at night, at 11, 12 o'clock at night, all the professional announcers who could criticize my work had gone home. The only one left at the station to give me any advice was the janitor, and his name was Pablo Gonzalez, and Pablo's English was worse than my father's, but I would drag him in and I would say, "Pablo, listen to this, how do I sound?" And he would go, "Más o menos, more or less, it sounds pretty good." And then they let me do something on the air for the first time. Again, following the advice of Martin Luther King, take that first step. You don't have to see the entire staircase. They let me do something on the air for the first time at the age of 18. There'd be some new medicine out, and I got to tell you where you could buy the medicine. So you want to hear the first words that John Quinones ever said on the radio? I got to say, "Now available at Walgreens." And that was it. And I was so proud of myself. Now available at Walgreens. And I would call my aunts and uncles, "You got to listen at 1:12 this afternoon, but don't blink because you'll miss the whole darn thing." But that was the first step. And then I got another job at another radio station. Then I got a fellowship to study at Columbia University in New York, got a master's in journalism. Then I went to Chicago, where I was hired as a local TV reporter at the age of 27. Which is unheard of. You don't start in Chicago. You start in Peoria, Illinois, or McAllen, Texas. But I was very lucky, and I just kept pushing and pushing. And it was in Chicago that I did a story about immigration, where I went undercover. I convinced my boss in Chicago to let me go to Mexico, and because I'm Mexican-American, again, capitalizing on who I am and my own background. I went to Mexico. I found a coyote, a smuggler, who for $300 sold me a fake birth certificate and a fake Social Security card. By the way, that's happening as we speak right now. The border issue is really serious. I don't know what answer we'll ever be able to come up with. But I just wanted to show what it's like to swim across the Rio Grande or cross the desert in Arizona. So I went undercover. And I found a coyote, a smuggler, who sold me a fake card and a fake Social Security card and birth certificate. And then at night he said, I'm going to put you in an inner tube and we're going to float across the Rio Grande. And I remember I was really nervous because I was by myself. I was wearing a wireless microphone under my t-shirt. And he said, take your clothes off. You're going to put it in the plastic bags. Obviously, you can't be wet when you get to the Texas side of the border because the Border Patrol will know that you just crossed the river. But I didn't want him to see my wireless microphone. So I convinced my coyote, my smuggler, to let me keep it on. And he puts me in an inner tube, and I floated across the Rio Grande, all captured on hidden camera for this story, for CBS in Chicago. And after I did that, I didn't stop there because this was for the story in Chicago. I went to the station, WBBM. I went back to the city, and I got a job at a restaurant where the owner of this Greek restaurant had 7 undocumented workers working for him from Mexico, and he had not paid them in 17 weeks. And every time these cooks and dishwashers and busboys would complain, he would say, hey guys, you get to eat all the food you want here. You get to sleep in the basement. You keep complaining and we'll call immigration and have you deported, which by the way happens in this country today. So I went there pretending that I just arrived from Mexico, speaking only Spanish, not dressed like this, obviously. And again, I was 26 years old, so I fit the profile of a young, new immigrant. And the guy hires me at that restaurant as a busboy and dishwasher. So by day, with a hidden camera, I'm washing dishes and bussing tables. And then at night, I went down and slept in the basement with these other 7 Mexican workers next to the dishes and the silverware and the cans of food. And I still wonder what they must have thought, because by day I'm washing dishes with them up there, and then at night I pulled out a little camera and I started interviewing them about their lives. And through tears, they told me how they were being held, almost against their will, in this restaurant. Well, the next day I came back to work, this time wearing a suit, speaking fluent English, with a camera crew behind me. And I remember we had to chase the owner of the restaurant through the parking lot because they didn't want to talk to me about what he was doing to those workers. But the day after that story aired, me swimming across the Rio Grande and working at that restaurant, the U.S. government moved in. They shut down the restaurant. They arrested the owner, and they got the workers the money they were owed and temporary visas to remain in this country while they worked on their residency. And I knew then that those were the kinds of stories that I was uniquely qualified to bring to ABC News and to American television. I call journalism the candle in the darkness. Imagine this room there's been a storm outside and the electricity's out and we can't see our hands in front of our faces and we're stumbling around looking for an exit. Well, the journalist, he or she, is the person with the little candle or the little flashlight, and they can shine it on the darkest corners of the room to illuminate injustice, to illuminate corruption, to illuminate human rights violations and civil rights violations. I think when journalism is done right, and we don't do it right all the time these days, but when it's done right without taking sides, those are the kinds of stories that we should be telling. It won my first Emmy Award, and there have been 7, but that was my very first one. And by the way, I'm nominated tomorrow night in New York for another Emmy Award for our coverage in Uvalde. We spent a year there. We spent a year covering the tragedy of this mass shooting in Uvalde, Texas. ABC News said, we're not going to go there and leave in a few weeks like we do with so many stories. We move on to the next story, right? There's always another mass shooting, unfortunately. Well, we stayed there a whole year telling the story of the people of Uvalde, and it's been nominated for an Emmy. It's a very awkward thing. We don't want to receive any kind of, award for that. It's such a tragedy. But we had a big team there that was in and out of there. But that story, my swimming across the border story, won an Emmy and brought me to ABC News. And I worked with Peter Jennings, who was my hero. This guy, I remember, he passed away now 13 years ago. He was amazing. He was a great journalist, but he looked like James Bond. He was always impeccably dressed. he could just talk off the top of his head forever. And he had this fancy British accent. He was Canadian, actually. But working for him was quite a thrill for me. And there I was, this brand new reporter covering Latin America because I speak Spanish. ABC News hired me to go to Central America. There were wars, you might remember, going on in El Salvador, Nicaragua, Panama, the Contras, the Sandinistas. I was based in Miami, flying in and out of those countries all the time. And one of my first stories for Peter Jennings was in Nicaragua, while I had wrangled up an interview with the president of that country, a guy named Daniel Ortega, who, by the way, is the president again today. But I got this exclusive interview, and back then it was a big deal to get the interview. And I called Peter Jennings from Nicaragua, and Peter's in New York, and I said, Peter, I've got this exclusive interview with Daniel Ortega. And he said, fine, young man. I don't think he knew my name. Fine, young man. I look forward to having you on World News tonight. I hang up the phone with Peter Jennings, and the phone rings again, and it's the president's office in Nicaragua canceling my interview. So now I got to call James Bond in New York at 4:30 in the afternoon. The news goes on at 6:30. They had made a 2-minute hole in the broadcast for my story, and now I got to tell them it's not going to happen. And I'm shaking in my boots. I called Peter, get him on the phone again. I said, Peter, they've canceled the interview. And I thought I was going to get yelled at or fired, right? And instead, Peter Jennings, this great anchor man and hero of mine, role model, said to me on the phone, he goes, John, this is going to happen again in your career where someone promises you something and they don't deliver. It happens all the time. It happens. He said, listen to me. Don't worry so much about talking to the movers and shakers of the world. You know, presidents of countries, politicians, the presidents of corporations. When they want to get their message out, they can issue a press release, right? They've got people to handle that. They can call a news conference and talk to the media. Don't worry so much about talking to the movers and shakers of the world. Instead, concentrate on talking to the moved and the shaken. In other words, talk to the real people. The fact that you're Latino and you can speak the language, you understand the mannerisms, you know when to step in, you know when to stop talking, when to step away. You can go into the countryside of any country in Central America and talk to the real victims of war, right? The real victims of natural disasters, because you understand them, because you're not seen as such an outsider. Concentrate, give a voice to people who don't have a voice. And man, talk to them, moved and the shaken. And I carried with me for decades as I ran all around the world for ABC News. And then I stumbled upon this show that I created. And again, I tell you all of this to explain why, to me, What Would You Do is very personal. You know, many of the issues that we tackle deal with all this stuff, you know. So it's funny, after all the Emmys and all the awards and all the traveling and all these years at ABC News, the one show that people, and young people, by the way, recognize me more for than anything, it's What Would You Do? And I had the pleasure of meeting Russ when we did a scenario at a store about slip and fall. What would you do if somebody fakes that injury? And I know that overwhelmingly the issue is not that, people faking it, it's businesses denying that it happened, right? But we wanted to do one, and we might do that one, by the way, now that I'm talking to Russ, we might do another What Would You Do scenario where the establishment refuses to take responsibility. But this one was about someone trying to fake it. And I brought that piece along and I wanted to show it to you. So is that okay with you? This is What Would You Do, starring Russ Kendzior.
Wait till I put the candle down.
Laurel and Hardy. Buster Keaton, a guaranteed laugh. But slapstick comedians aren't the only people who use the pratfall to earn a living. In stores across the country, people are cleaning up by falling down. The slip and fall, one of the most widely practiced forms of fraud. That water on the floor is a lawsuit waiting to happen, and this woman knows that.
Oh! Oh!
Ma'am, are you okay? What happened?
And when the manager runs over, there's only one thing on her mind.
This is a lawsuit.
A quick buck. What would you do if you witness a slip and sue?
Ow! Jeez!
Do you blow the whistle or just blow away? We're back with our hidden cameras at the Fort Salonga Market in Northport, New York, and hired stunt actors to play our would-be scammers.
Is that right?
The manager is also an actor. During the morning shopping rush, our actress sets up her claim. These customers seem to notice. But once our con artist goes down, this lady does not speak up. After we break the scene, she tells us she was going to tell management.
What happened? You fell in this water?
Yeah, there's like a lot of water right there in my back.
This other woman is glued to the action.
My tailbone hurt.
Paper towel.
But later she tells us she never saw any scam.
Everybody watching who could still pull this off.
Right, and it'll look real to everybody in the room.
These cases are nothing new. More than 15 years ago, Primetime reported on the subtle art of falling for money.
It's the easiest way nowadays to make a buck without having a gun in your hand.
Today, it's even more prevalent. These individuals were all caught on surveillance video trying to make some fast cash.
You all right?
But hundreds of other fraudulent claims each year go unseen, resulting in huge settlements.
Practice of the insurance industry to pay these claims, and they do, to the tune of $3 billion a year.
Russell Kendzior, founder of the National Floor Safety Institute and author of Falls Aren't Funny.
And unfortunately, the insurance industry is more than willing to write checks to these people.
Why?
It's easy. It's less expensive. The cost of an investigation, an insurance claim investigation, oftentimes is far more expensive than the cost of paying the claim.
You're gonna pay for this. This is ridiculous.
The last line of defense might just be that person standing next to you at the deli counter. Back at the store, our thief is back in action. This man notices immediately. Unsuspecting patrons rush to her side. And after several minutes, he breaks his silence.
I'm very passive, but you squirted water with a little bottle on the floor to save it. You can't always become just part of the scenery. Sometimes you got to get involved. That's how I feel.
This woman stands and stares for minutes before walking away without saying a word.
And the consequences for the rest of us?
We all pay for it. We pay for it every day in the products and services we use. Product costs go up, insurance rates continue to go up. We see this in all of our lives.
The slip and fall. You might think it only affects these people,
Did anybody see what happened here?
but in the end, we all wind up paying.
And we've done, like I said, over 1,000 scenarios, and people often ask me, which was your favorite one? I love that one. But among my favorites was we did another sort of slip and fall where someone is walking along the sidewalk and collapses, right? And what do? It could have been a heart attack, it could have been fainted, you don't know. And we did it outside the train station in Newark, New Jersey at 7, 8, 9 in the morning, when people are in a hurry to take their train to go into the city, to go to work or to go to school. What would you do then? Not only do you not know how to attend somebody who's had a medical problem perhaps, but you're in a hurry. You don't have time to spend taking care of them. So at first we did it with a well-dressed businesswoman, an actress, a stunt artist like them, who's walking along and suddenly collapses on the sidewalk very convincingly. And when it was a well-dressed businesswoman, people stopped immediately. They put a coat over her, it was cold, they fashioned a pillow on her under her head, and they called 911. We were blown away. I mean, who would have thought? In Newark, New Jersey, when people are in a hurry, they're stopping to help this woman. But then, as I often do, I said, wait a minute, but what if we switch things up? And instead of a well-dressed businesswoman in her 40s, it's an elderly man who's like in his 80s, and he's homeless, and he's disheveled, and he's dirty, and he's smelly, and he's holding a beer can in his hand. So we found an actor to play that role, an elderly actor, and we dressed him down, and He looked perfect, and he fell very convincingly. So he's walking along, and he collapses. When it's an older, homeless, elderly, homeless, smelly man, 88 people walked by, and no one stopped to help him. People were stepping over him. One lady made the sign of the cross and kept walking, saying, wow, this is a beautiful view of Newark. And we were ready to come out and break the scene, as I often do when I ask people why they did or didn't step in. Before I could get out there, we heard the tapping of a walking cane on a microphone, right? And then on the sidewalk, she was walking along. And then into the frame of this hidden camera comes this beautiful elderly woman who's stumbling along because she has suffered a stroke. And guess what? She's homeless herself. And guess what? She stops to help. Back to my idea that folks who have been there respond, more readily. She's homeless. She's not elderly, but she knows what it's like. She suffered a stroke. She stops, and she starts asking people going by, excuse me, does someone have a cell phone, because she didn't have one, to call 911 for this man on the ground? 47 more people walk by, and no one is stopping. She then bends over and did something we didn't expect. She takes the beer can out of the actor's hands, and she stumbles over with her cane to the trash can and throws it away, as if she was thinking, maybe if I give him a little bit of dignity, right? Maybe if people don't think he's a drunk, maybe folks will step in. 38 more people go by. We're counting them, and no one is stopping to help. The camera was really tight on her face, and I remember she made a fist to the heavens, and it was almost like she was cursing God himself, saying, how can you allow this to happen? She was angry. And then she bent down again to the actor on the ground, and we could hear this because the actor on the ground was wearing a wireless microphone. And she leaned over and she said, sir, I don't know your name, but I'm going to call you Billy. And she said, Billy, my name is Linda Hamilton. And don't you worry, my man, I want to stay here until help arrives. Well, then finally a woman, and by the way, in all the studies and all the shows we've done, we find that it's women who step in more quickly than guys. I don't know, it's because guys worry about it becoming physical, or because women have a maternal instinct, or because they're stronger than we are, I don't know. But time and again, it's women who step in. Sometimes we'll be doing a scenario, and there's a couple in the restaurant, right? And the woman wants to get involved, and the husband's holding her back saying, honey, mind your own business. So finally, in this scenario, a woman stops and calls 911 for the man, the homeless guy on the ground. And then, so finally, we come out with our cameras and we start interviewing people and getting them to sign releases. But in all the chaos, when I come out with the cameras, people are relieved, right? They're happy that this was just a show, that the man is okay. He was an actor. In all that excitement, our hero slipped away. Linda Hamilton, this woman who stopped to help, left. We couldn't interview her. We knew her name because we heard her say her name when she introduced herself to the man on the ground. And we put the story a few weeks later on What Would You Do on ABC. And the morning after it aired, we got all these hundreds of phone calls and emails and social media postings saying, who was that woman? We want to help that homeless woman. Our viewers, they raised $9,000 for her on a GoFundMe page for Linda Hamilton. They posted her picture from the TV screen on the website, on Facebook, calling it Touched by an Angel, Touched by a Hero, Linda Hamilton. And they raised money. So now we got to go find her, right? To give her the $9,000 that our viewers have found, raised. How do you find a homeless person? So we sent our team back to Newark, New Jersey. We posted her picture, her poster from the TV screen all over Newark, at train stations, at homeless shelters, at liquor stores. And finally, we found her. A week later, we found Linda Hamilton. So my producer says, John, come out. We got to interview her now about why she do an update on the scenario, right? So I went to Newark and I sat on some church steps. And I remember interviewing this woman with my laptop. My producer said, bring your laptop because she hasn't seen the piece. Of course, she doesn't have a TV. She's homeless. So I showed her the video. And I said, Linda, remember the man who fell and you helped? And goes, yes, I remember. So we got her the $9,000 in the bank. We got her a house to live in, an apartment to live in from ABC, and we got her medicine that she was supposed to be taking for her heart condition. And the thing that made her most excited of all, we got her own cell phone. And she was like a 12-year-old girl jumping up and down with joy with her own cell phone. And I said, now, Linda, the next time you witness something wrong, you can call 911. But at the end of my story, I said, Linda, people are calling you a hero. They're calling you an angel. They have this Facebook page that's called Touched by an Angel. Do you consider yourself a hero, an angel? And she gave me this straight look that I'll never forget, right into the camera. She goes, no way, John Quinones, no way. She said, let me tell you what happened. She said, I think God put me on that corner, on that street, because he knew you were there with your what would you do cameras. And he wanted to teach people a lesson. And who better to teach that lesson than someone who has walked in the shoes of the homeless? So this morning I leave you with that lesson. The next time you witness an injustice, you witness something wrong, and the little voice in the back of your head says, do something, remember the words and the actions of Linda Hamilton, this woman who was homeless, who had suffered a stroke, and yet she stopped a man who was down, not because she was going to be on national television. She didn't know that. Not because she was going to get $9,000 in the bank and a house to live in and medicine for her heart and her own cell phone. She did not know that. She did it because, as my own mother Maria would say, her corazón, her heart, told her it was the right thing to do. Thank you for having me here. It's been a real joy having you, really, being with you. We have a little time. I think, anybody have a question about the show or how we do it at all? If not, I have something else I want to end with. When we break the scene on these scenarios, we don't want to embarrass anyone. So we have people sign a release, although technically we don't have to, because we're filming in one-party consent states where in a public, no one can film you in the privacy of your home, but in a public place, in a restaurant. That's why we're always at parks and restaurants and bowling alleys, wherever there's no expectation of privacy, as the law says. But still, even in public places, we don't want to be that show that embarrasses you. Maybe you've had a few drinks, you say something ridiculous, and then we put you on TV, on my show, because it sounded so good. So we know, we have folks sign a release. If you don't want to be on the show, you won't be on the show. We won't show your face. That's why we saw a lot of pixelated faces in the video. Ironically, a lot of people want to be on the show. Even people who say the most god-awful things, I'll say to them, it sounded pretty harsh. And yeah, but when am I on TV? I want to tell the family to watch. But among the scenarios we did was one where the question was, what would you do if you're at a bar and you see a guy who's had way too much to drink and he's getting ready to get in his car and drive away, and he's got his 8-year-old little boy with him, and the little boy's like, Daddy, we got to go to soccer practice. And the old man is saying, oh, one more shot of tequila, son, right? And he's drinking and drinking. He's drinking water, but no one else knows that, right? They're actors. What would you do if he's about to get in his car with his little boy, not only endangering his life and his son's, but innocent people on the highway? What would you do? So we did it at this restaurant in New Jersey, and he's falling down drunk. And some people stopped him from getting in his car and driving away, and some people let him go. Too many people let him get in his car with his little boy and drive away. But among the couple who stopped him and stepped right in, was this middle-aged couple that was at the bar, right, having lunch at the bar. And they see what's going on. The man is falling down drunk. He's dropping his keys. The little boy's begging him to leave. And they step in right away. They tell the bartender not to serve him anymore. They sit the drunk guy down in the seat. They get him coffee. They comfort the little boy. They call the man a taxi, and they take away his keys, right? So they did all the right things. And I come out, man, wow, that was amazing. You guys are the heroes of the day. Just sign a release so we can put you on What Would You Do? And the couple said, no, we don't want to be on your show. I said, no, please, because we live for moments like this. You guys were the heroes. You did all the right things. You took away his car keys. You sat him down. You comforted the little boy. Please sign the release. You're the best ones today. And they said, no, we don't want to sign your release. We don't want to be on your show. And I said to them, why not? Why not? I was shattered. I wanted them so badly on the show. And they looked at me and said, why wouldn't you sign the release? And they said, because I'm not married to her, and she's not married to me. And if you put us on national television, you're going to ruin two families. So it tells you something about the sliding scale of morality, right? You might do the right thing about one thing, but maybe not so much the other. Thank you guys for having me here. It's been a pleasure being with you. Thank you so much. All right.
What John had said resonated. First of all, I'm from Chicago.
Oh, that's right.
And Chicago then was a tough town to grow up in, especially if you were Polish. They had Polish jokes, if you remember.
Yeah.
But we also have a connection in Peoria.
Really?
I actually went to college in Peoria, and Laura Cooper's from Pekin. So we have that connection. But what you said really resonated about the What Would You Do program, because we actually show on Safety News. We have a lot of different episodes. One of them I think you would enjoy is a big box retailer where a person is dripping water. It's actually a sippy cup or milk from their shopping cart. And you see it on video. Drip, drip, drip. They're in the checkout. They're pushing their cart closer and closer to the cashier. And you see the milk on the ground. And the people who dropped the milk are looking at it. They look back. They look at it again. And they move forward. Another shopper comes up behind them and points to it. Actually points to the milk on the floor. They, again, all look at it, and they move on. And then we fast forward, John, it's a 20-minute long video, but we fast forward it so it speeds up. 100 people.
Wow.
Walk right past the milk, look at it, keep going, including 4 store employees who literally looked at the spill, did nothing about it, and just kept going. And then, of course, sadly, it ends with a woman falling and breaking her hip. And so that's kind of normal. The What Would You Do format is the real world. People who, as I like to say, give a damn. Do you give a damn? Because giving a damn goes a long way. And John kind of epitomizes that message of people who give a damn, people who get involved, people who are willing to take a risk. And we live in a society, as he said, that, just a lot of people don't want to get involved. Liability, whatever it might be. There's a lot of reasons, okay? There's no simple remedy. But getting involved goes a long way, because you know what? You never know whose life it is you might save by getting involved, by getting invested. And it doesn't take a lot. Much of what John was talking about today with the What Would You Do episodes are simple. They're very simple scenarios. They're not complex. They're everyday events, like slips and falls. I mean, we all know this. We're invested in this industry. But I want to thank John for coming out, talking to us about the very issues, if you will, that we focus on, and that's real world events where people are getting hurt. Much of what Would You Do focuses on does not necessarily involve an injury, but the ones that do, I would have to bet, are probably the most impactful.
Yeah, absolutely.
People get connected to that. I mean, they really do. And your job, as I like to say, my job, is to get that connection really going, okay? We have to do a better job. We have to spread the gospel, if you will, of prevention to all the people in our lives, and even the people that are not in our lives. So with that, I want to thank again John for coming out.
Of course.
We'll see you soon.
Yeah.
We'll see you soon.
We're going to do it again. We're going to feature the next one with you again. It's time we revisit
Yeah, it's
this.
about damn time we do it.
Yeah.
What was that, 15 years ago?
Yeah, something like that. We look the same, though, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.